what's going on here? You were on a Southeast Alaska bear hunt.
Yeah.
And let's go through the entire hunt, but you definitely implemented some unique tactics. All right, what is up, everybody? Got a good one for you today. Across from me, digitally, I have Mr. Clay Newcomb, part of the MeatEater crew, involved with Bear Hunting Magazine for many years, host of the Bear Grease podcast, amongst other things. Now, you might be noticing a word trend here, Clay, and the word is bear. And would it safe to say you're a pretty passionate bear hunter?
Yeah, I believe that would be safe to say, Mark.
Okay, good. I thought that might be the case. Now, Clay, one of the things that I personally love about bear hunting is they live in a variety of landscapes. You can pursue them in a variety of ways. You've got spot and stalk. You can hunt them with hounds. You can hunt over bait. And apparently there's a new way, or another way that I wasn't even aware of until as of late. So we're gonna get there. There. So maybe that's a little foreshadowing,
right.
A little bit of a tease. But Clay, before we get too deep in the weeds here, man, you've just got like a really cool, just personal history, history in the outdoor industry, and doing a lot of really cool stuff. Just tell us a little bit about yourself and what you have going on, throughout your career. It's all really neat stuff.
Yeah. I gotta start off by commenting on your intro there about bears, and then I'll get to me. Is that okay, Mark?
Hey, you know what? I honestly I prefer talking about me. I mean, I'm just kidding.
Well, the you said bears, you hunt them in so many different ways. Bears are the second most widely distributed big game animal in North America, from the Atlantic coast to the West Coast, from the Arctic down into old Mexico. There are black bears. And they also, I think, are the most diversified animal in methods of hunting, bar none. Like, there's no other animal that has so many methods, and it's because they span such a wide geographic area that people in different places over the years, and this wasn't like hunters trying to find fun ways to hunt animals. It was indigenous people. It was pioneers and frontiersmen that came here, market hunters trying to find ways to acquire bear meat and bear grease. And so we have all these unique, different ways to hunt bears. And I think that's what makes them so interesting. And they're survivors, man. Whatever's happening ecologically in North America today, in the midst of all the crisis that we have environmentally in so many ways, and in different species of big game that we love and hunt, some of them are struggling. Man, black bears are not one of those species. The generalists, the omnivores, are thriving. So I had to comment on that. We can talk more about that, but that my love of bears came honestly because I didn't know anything about them when I first started hunting. It was like this, there was this hole inside of my knowledge base after the first bear that I ever killed. And I had been a bow hunter for basically my whole life at that time. And all the other animals, turkey, deer, squirrel, other stuff that I'd hunted and killed. I knew about these animals, and I killed a bear, realized I didn't know anything about them. That kind of set me on a track. But no, I grew up in Arkansas. My family's been here for a long time. And in Western Arkansas, we call it the mountainous side of Arkansas. I've had a few people chuckle saying me calling Arkansas mountains, or Arkansas, what we have here, mountains. And if those people were standing in front of me and said that, man, they might wish they hadn't. These are mountains we've got here, brother. Ozark and Ouachitas. And I've always been really connected to place. I have a deep sense of appreciation for place and stories that are connected to place. And there's something that's really grand about loving a place just because that's where you're from. I mean, if I was from the Rocky Mountain West, which has so much majestic, obvious beauty, or if I was from other places that maybe have more grand landscapes. I mean, I know why those people love it, but I love it when people love places like Mississippi and Alabama and Arkansas and Missouri and, Wisconsin, these places that aren't as quite as glamorous as some of our more beautiful places, but are more evidently beautiful.
Yeah. I think man, every landscape can be absolutely amazing if you look hard enough. And I think you hit on something there that there's a lot of truth. Where you grow up, or oftentimes what you call home, I think that gets ingrained into the fiber of your being in a lot of ways. And I think, I think everybody likes home. There's just, something feels good about home, and you see people, they travel, maybe their career takes them, on a pretty windy path, but oftentimes they end up where they started. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. And you talk about landscapes being more like evidently beautiful. I remember when I moved to far western Nebraska from the Pacific Northwest, I was like, what have I done? And the more and the longer that I lived there, the more I fell in love with that open landscape, and you start to see things that on the surface weren't evident. And yeah, I mean, every landscape is unique and cool in its own way. That's for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, just a little bit of a more practical chronological journey. So I grew up primarily whitetail bow hunting. My dad was a big bow hunter back in the 70s, kind of when bow hunting was revived in the country. It was never fully lost, but in the 70s there was some technology advances, and there was just a lot more access to bow hunting. My dad loved it, and to this day, he's in his mid 70s. He's still bow hunting whitetail deer on public land. That's what I grew up doing, and that's all we knew, and was a very just loved to hunt, just like so many people I know that are listening right now. Never dreamed that I would work in the outdoor industry. That was never a goal, never entered my mind, really. And went to college at the University of Arkansas, started a landscape company, basically so I could work for myself, so I could raise my young family, but also so that I could be in the woods when the white oak leaves turn maroon in the fall. That's what I remember telling people back in the day. I just wanted to have that freedom. My dad was a professional. He was he worked as a banker, and my whole life he told us, he said, boys, you got to work for yourself. You got to work for yourself if you don't want to be confined by a job, or, by a 9 to 5. And I don't know if he really knew how much that impacted me as a kid, but it did, because I went to college and never really used my college degree officially or formally a day in my life. I started a landscape company, which was a means to an end. I wasn't passionate about landscaping. I did enjoy hard work and still do today, but it did enable me to hunt and to raise my family, which were my two goals. And then going back to my original story about this first bear that I killed, which would have been in 2001 here in Arkansas, that I killed this animal. It was an incredible hunt, and realized I knew nothing about this animal. And it was kind of a hollow feeling to me, because, deer and turkey, I mean, we knew what they ate, when they bred, where they lived in the mountains, how they moved, what they did, how to cook them. Like, we knew as much as we could know, for the time, and we felt like we did. And this bear, we were just like, holy cow, what in the world? And people had told us you couldn't eat bear, and we found out that wasn't true. And I was in college, and that set me on a journey. I went back to the University of Arkansas and went into the library and started pulling out books that I guarantee you nobody had looked at in 15 years. I mean, these books nobody had checked these out, and they were the thesis, the research projects, the thesis PhD students. at the university who had studied bears, and there were about 4 different studies on Arkansas bears. They were the only ones that had ever been done. And I read those cover to cover and just was memorizing data and taking notes. I mean, for no reason, it was just interesting to me. And that would roll into me starting a hunting conservation organization for bears in the state early on, which is no longer in existence. I kind of look back and laugh at it a little bit, but at the time it was like serious business to me. We started the Arkansas Black Bear Association. It was cool. I wish it was still around, but it's kind of like it was a stepping stone. And then once I stepped up onto another stone, I just couldn't figure out how to make it work. But so I started the Arkansas Black Bear Association and just really started to dive into bears. And man, hey, Mark, stop me if I'm rambling on. I can continue to ramble.
No, I'm loving it, man. I mean, this is my favorite part. So yeah, keep going.
Okay. Well, what happened in Arkansas, I think, is what happened in a lot of places, is that Arkansas was once known as the bear state. Pre-Civil War in the 1830s, 40s, and 50s, all the literature coming out of Arkansas had market hunting for bears somewhere inside of it. This place, before we became a state, people were coming here to market hunt. And it wasn't just bears they were after. They were after all the normal stuff, deer hides and whatnot. But there was one it was called Southwest Humor. A guy named Thorpe wrote a story called The Big Bear of Arkansas. And we did a whole podcast on it on Bear Grease. It's fascinating. He wrote this. It's like a fun, fictional folklore tale, but it's set up like it's a true story. And this story was published across the country and basically went viral. This story called The Big Bear of Arkansas in 1830. It was, I believe, in 1841. And the story branded the state so strongly. And back then, these stories, this was essentially like a social media post that went viral, or a song that went viral, or a movie that just people went crazy about. I mean, they didn't have movies, they didn't have radio, they had nothing but newspapers for entertainment. And this story, The Big Bear of Arkansas, was published in newspapers across the country, and people were enthralled with the American frontier. And that's where the eyes of the world and the country was on the American frontier. And here's the story called The Big Bear of Arkansas. Well, that story was so good. What happens with a viral trend today is that if there's a viral trend and somebody does something, 100 other people do the same thing. And so other people started writing about bear hunting in Arkansas, and Arkansas became known as the bear state. And we had a ton of bears, and maybe not any more than Missouri and Mississippi and Oklahoma and whatnot, but the focus was on bears. Well, between, the 1860s and 1900, what happened all across the country with our big game happened here. They killed them all. At one time, there was 50,000 bears here, and there were estimated 50 bears left in the whole state. So from 1900 to 1960, basically 3 generations of humans, there were no bears in Arkansas, and they were culturally forgotten. We forgot them. Like my dad had zero knowledge of bear hunting, zero interest in it, zero. His dad and granddad didn't talk to him about bear hunting because they weren't here. And in 3 generations and 2 generations, you can forget a lot. And so between 1950 and 1954 and 1964, the Arkansas Game and Fish Commission brought in black bears into Arkansas and released them in 3 different locations. And essentially the hunters, and this isn't hype or a spin, but literally the hunters, the people that wanted to hunt bear, brought them back, restored them into Arkansas. And then in 1980 was the first year there was a bear season in Arkansas. And then in the year 2001 was the first year that they kind of liberalized the season enough that it was really a feasible thing for people to hunt bear. And that's the year that I killed my first bear, was in 2001. And I was amazed at the way that people culturally handled bear here. A lot of people thought they were vermin or just had no value, or it's like a trash animal almost, which shocked me, because when I killed this bear and started reading this stuff and seeing this old history, I was like, man, this is a world-class resource. This is an incredible thing that's happened here. And that's really what turned me on to bear. I mean, that's my start, is that I saw that in a lot of ways, bears for years were treated differently than other big game animals. People were afraid to talk about them because of the ways that we hunt them. I mean, man, when I started talking about bears in 2013, 10 years ago, when I acquired Bear Hunting Magazine, which I'm kind of getting ahead of myself, but in 2013, I acquired Bear Hunting Magazine and started publishing it. I feel like the outdoor industry was afraid to talk about them mainstream. I mean, I it's just true, because we hunted them with hounds. We hunted them with bait. We kind of had this ways that was harder to tell a story about, and it was a little more controversial. And we started telling those stories and telling why we do this and the rich history that we have with bears. And I think today, 10 years later, and there were a lot of guys that were doing that. It wasn't just us, but we were right there at the beginning of it. I feel like now today we are, a lot more people are interested in bears. They aren't, they know the philosophy, the ethics behind the way that we hunt them, the way that we hunt them. We know how to use them. We know the story that we utilize more from a bear than any other big game animal that we hunt in North America. And that's true. I mean, like, how many white-tailed deer hides have you tanned of deer that you've killed, Mark? You know, probably not very many.
But that number would be 0.
Right.
But
and then
I can tell you I've tanned every bear I shot.
You bet. I mean, I would say a high percentage of every bear that's killed is the hides being tanned. And, you know, you go back to utilization of bear grease. You know, we can, if a bear has a lot of fat, more and more guys are rendering down bear fat and finding ways to use it. And it's really incredible. And then bear meat, man. I mean, back in the day, I mean, my buddy Steve Rennell is the one who turned me on to this, but it's true, is that back in the day, they killed deer for their hides and bear for their meat. I mean, if you killed a bear and a deer, man, that deer meat wasn't near as good as bear meat. And so basically, the narrative on American bear hunting is incredible, absolutely incredible. And I'm kind of getting ahead of myself too here, Mark, but I think that we have a phrase that we've used a lot called guard the gate, which is an idea that the lowest, the most vulnerable part of a system is what becomes really the most important part of that system. And in the North American model of wildlife conservation, which bears are a huge part of it, it's the, you know, behind white-tailed deer, I've heard it said that a black bear is likely the second animal that someone will hunt. You know, there's more in the Boone and Crockett, Pope and Young records. You know, white-tailed deer is number 1, black bear is going to be number 2. They're an important part of our system. And they are for sure undoubtedly the most attacked by the anti-hunting community. It's an easy narrative. It's a one-step sell. If you have no connection to bear hunting in rural America, for me to say, hey, these guys are using dogs and doing this to hunt bears, this is bad. That's an easy sell to someone who has no heritage and connection back to bear or understand how we use them. It's a much more complicated sell to say, hey, let me tell you why we hunt bears over bait. Let me tell you about the places where any place there's a bear season where you can hunt over bait. It's because the vegetation is so dang thick, you can't see more than 20 yards, and we could never take the bears out that we needed to. You know, hunting over bait gives you the ability to be selective and harvest older age males and get a good shot angle and all this stuff. And you can talk about dogs the same way. And that's a much bigger sell to someone but it's a compelling idea and thought. And so I think really the bear hunting is a very vital part of the whole system, especially when we start thinking about more than just the next 10 years of conservation, the next 20 years. Let's think about the next 100 years of conservation. Our great grandchildren, will they have the freedoms that we have? And I think a lot of the mentality, like we are living off the seeds sown by the pioneers of conservation in the late 1800s and early 1900s. So many of them that were doing stuff, building culture, building ideas and philosophy, protecting wild lands. Like we're now living off the fruit of that. And I mean, so much of what we're doing now is what the future is going to be living off of, you know? And so I think bears are really important, aside from just being a cool animal that's good to eat and a real challenge to hunt. I think they hold a really important place in the big picture system. And that's part of why I'm passionate about them. But yeah, so that's kind of how I got into bears, Mark.
Man, I love it. And, you know, and I want to commend you for the job that you've done of telling, you know, the story of the bear and enlightening people. And in a lot of ways, I'd say rekindling what was somewhat lost for a while, right? Like you said, you know, like we had a bunch of bears, and then, you know, through market hunting, we didn't have that many bears. Like you said, there's kind of a gap there where people weren't having, they weren't pursuing bears. They weren't having interactions. They weren't able to learn about them because they weren't around them. And just what you've done throughout your career with the podcast, which I know we'll get there now, I'm getting ahead of myself, but just enlightening the world on the importance and significance of this animal. I mean, how it played a role in shaping our country and amongst other things. Yeah, it's incredibly important. You touched on the fact that hunting bears, it can be a pretty easy spin for groups that are not for hunting. You take a few clips here, you maybe, you know, provide zero context, maybe you provide your own context. That's, I guess it doesn't have to be correct to spin something that way and serve it up to folks. And yeah, the guard the gate philosophy is a very real thing. Like, for whatever reason, you know, bears and, you know, some other critters, they kind of are the target of folks who, you know, in my opinion, their overall agenda is they don't want hunting anymore. And you know, my home state is Washington. We recently lost, you know, I still consider myself part of that state, you know, the spring bear season there. And I don't think there was a whole lot of foundation provided to make that decision. In that state, we have a 2-bear limit fall season, and I'm hearing that there's rumblings on saying, well, maybe we need to take away that second bear. And it's like you said, it's guard the way. It's like, okay, boom, you know, we took away the spring bear season. Well, it doesn't stop there, right? And it's just kind of like that first domino to fall. Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Incrementalization. They take things incrementally. And I think the biggest thing that we can do is just tell our story and be passionate about it, be confident about it, and then take action in the places where we can. You know, there's a lot of great groups out there that are every day fighting for our rights behind the scenes and stuff. And man, I don't even sometimes I don't even like to focus on the negative. I think the more that we focus on the history, the heritage, the common sense, the success of our model, it just speaks for itself and just can override some of the stuff. But, you know, as we just keep telling our story and not be afraid of it, you know, I think it's important.
I think that is the key. And I mean, that's, you know, it's hard to, when you do articulate it in those ways, in the ways that you do, I would think, barring just, you know, somebody making a judgment on just pure emotion, which does happen, difficult to argue with.
Yeah.
Difficult to
Exactly.
argue with.
It's true.
Maybe we need to expand the ABA and go to well, they already have an NBA. I was going to say the National Bear Association, but we'll come up with a different name, Clay. But we gotta keep this message out there. So okay, so where are we at in your story?
Well, golly, man, I just went on a big spiel there.
Oh,
I mentioned if you're talking about kind of my career history and whatnot, I had Arkansas Black Bear Association, and then I acquired Bear Hunting Magazine in 2013 and did that for 8 years. And Bear Hunting Magazine is the only print bear hunting magazine in the world still in existence. My good friend Colby Moorhead is running the magazine, is doing a great job, and that's when I was able to professionally dedicate a lot of my world to bear hunting. And I always tell people during those 8 years, all the media that I was producing, most of it was about bears, but I was still doing all the stuff I've always done. I've always bow hunted for whitetails and it's been an equal passion. I mean, I can't say that I love bear hunting more than whitetail deer hunting. I mean, I really do, but I've dedicated a lot of my career, which that's what people would see, to bear hunting. And also grew up small game hunting. I mean, we coon hunt with hounds and squirrel hunt with dogs. And I enjoy training, riding mules and using mules in any kind of hunting I can do. I just enjoy that. And then in I believe it was 2020 is when I went to work for MeatEater. And there was a period of time, which is a little confusing still maybe to some people, but there was a period of time when I was still publishing Bear Hunting Magazine and working for MeatEater. And so about a year, but after that year, the magazine now, Colby has it. And so I don't technically have anything to do with Bear Hunting Magazine other than I'm a big fan. And I talk to Colby all the time. I mean, we talk about the magazine and what he's doing. And so my heart's still there, and it's a great resource for people for sure. But and then, hey, stop me if you have a question or if you want to direct me a certain way, but
no, let's, I mean, this might be the easiest podcast I ever do, Clay. So I appreciate it, man. This is great. So yeah, I mean, so how did, you're talking about that transition or into with the folks at MeatEater, like how did that come about?
Well, I got a 1-sentence email from Steve Ranella with no greeting or like goodbye, good to talk to you. He just said, "What's your cell phone number?" I hardly knew the guy. That's Steve Ranella for you. No, it was really something I'll never forget because I've always been a fan of MeatEater and Steve Ranella. I really have. I mean, he's one of the guys that I've always looked up to. I've been heavily influenced by Ranella in a lot of different ways before I ever knew I'd work for him. And so in 2020, I literally got an email from him and said, "What's your cell phone number?" And told him, had no idea what he wanted. And, like a week later, he called me and I had talked to him before. So, I knew who he was and I knew he knew who I was, but had no idea they were interested at the time in me working for him. And he said, "Hey man, are you interested in working for MeatEater? And you wouldn't have to move. You could stay in Arkansas." I mean, they kind of had it. They kind of had it scripted out there pretty good. And they said, "We want you to do a podcast for us." And it was just too good not to do it. I mean, it was would be a dream of mine to work with them. And so pretty shortly, well, it took a while. It took 6 months. But I was working for MeatEater, and we no, there was the only talk of the podcast beforehand was that I was just going to have a podcast for MeatEater. Just didn't know what it was going to be. And the formulation of the Bear Grease podcast was kind of interesting because I told him, I said, hey, the only thing I want to do for sure is I said, I want to have long form conversations with people. Because I felt like in what I was doing, I had a podcast before called the Bear Hunting Magazine podcast. And I felt like that's where the magic of human conversation plays out, is in long form conversation. And I knew also that the trend and what MeatEater was actually doing was they were having kind of these shorter form, like Cal's Week in Review, which is an incredible podcast. And I kind of thought they might want me to do something like that. And I said, I want to have long form conversations with people. And so, and they, were like, hey, we'll work all that out. Well, when it came down to it, the team kind of had this idea of a documentary style podcast that was maybe a little bit shorter than like a 2-hour, bigger kind of Joe Rogan MeatEater style podcast. And the first moment I was like, man, no, I want to have long form conversations with people. And then we quickly were like, how about you have long form conversations with people, but you build this documentary style podcast. And it actually was brilliant because on any given episode, I'll have multiple guests. I mean, sometimes as many as 3 or 4 on the same episode. And I will have had a long form conversation with them. I mean, I go and talk to people, and then when you can have long form conversations with experts, but then basically cherry pick the portions that tell the story that you need to tell and combine them together with other long form conversations, it basically becomes a concentrated story with the information and the emphasis and the entertainment that you need. And it ended up being really great, which initially I'm kind of painting the picture that I was kind of opposed to it. I was like, what? I don't want to do that. And I didn't say that like that. That's an exaggeration, but the formulation of Bear Grease, which if nobody's listened to Bear Grease, we describe it as a documentary style podcast, meaning there's multiple guests. But there's voiceover, there's VO describing sections of the podcast. And we're a history, anthropology, hunting, conservation, storytelling podcast. It's from a branding perspective, I wish we had a little tight, clean way to describe what we are, but we tell a lot of different kinds of stories. The only thread that really connects them is there's always some connection to the natural world, usually hunting, but not always. I mean, we tell stories about rural America and the hunting conservation space, and we do historical profiles on people that have been influential in American identity and identity of people like us, Mark, that have a connection to the natural world. Daniel Boone, and we did a big series on Davy Crockett. We did a series on Holt Collier, African-American guy from Mississippi who fought in the Civil War and killed over 3,000 bears with hounds in Mississippi and guided Teddy Roosevelt, which became that hunt created the naming of the teddy bear, which is something that every one of us would say and be familiar with, but rarely know where that story came from. We've done stories on Native American leaders. I mean, one of my favorite series we ever did was on the Shawnee leader Tecumseh. I mean, just incredible stories that I can't say I was an expert on these guys before I did the podcast. I mean, that's the thing is I'm learning. I'm learning as I do these. And I feel like and this is a credit to the team that I work with and the company that I work for that gives me the freedom to do this stuff for real. It's not a plug for MeatEater. It's just the truth. They let me do whatever I want. and that means there's a lot of creative freedom, and there's a lot of freedom for me to jump on an airplane and fly to New York and interview someone for an hour and get on a plane and go back. We do almost everything in person. Very, very little we do online. Like, I want to be looking in somebody's eyes when I'm talking to them. And I'd like to think if we do a series on somebody that it's going to be robust and, you know, I mean, I don't know of a Daniel Boone series as far as podcasts goes that would be any more robust than what we created. And Davy Crockett and Tecumseh, Holt Collier and Warner Glenn and all these iconic characters. Like, when I go into it, I'm like, my goal is let's make something that people will be able to refer to years from now and say, man, you got to go listen to that Boone series, you know.
For
and
sure.
That's fun. That's a challenge for me. And it's not something I've ever, it's a skill set that's developing. I mean, I didn't know how to do any of this before I started, you know, but it's been a lot of fun.
Well, I'd say your intuition for finding a good story and for seeking out the people to help tell that story, and then as well as your storytelling and ability to articulate those things, you've got quite the natural knack for that, Clay. And yeah, the podcast itself, I mean, there's a lot of podcasts out there, and it truly is, and I'm not just saying this, it's a standout because of the content and the stories that you tell, but the style in which you guys do it, like, yes, it's a documentary, but it's a story, it's an audio book, it's so many things wrapped up in one, and like the way it bounces around, and then you guys tie it up, you know, at the end with a bow. Like, I mean, it's really cool, man. And I don't think there's not anything else out there that I'm aware of, at least in what I'd call our space, doing anything similar. And if a person hasn't listened to it, I would certainly encourage them to, because like you said, Clay, you're diving into these things so in depth. I mean, I think that, you know, 10, 20, 30, whatever years from now, people are going to look back at what you guys have put together, and that's going to be like the go-to resource.
Yeah. Well, it's been pretty incredible, the reception we've had too. I mean, people, I didn't think people would care, to be honest with you. What's so funny about a lot of the stuff that I've done is that I wasn't sure people were interested in some of the stuff we talk about, and it turns out they are. You know, I mean, it really does, and it's been a ton of fun. It really has been a ton of fun.
Well, I think sometimes you don't know, like even when I'm listening to it, right? And I guess I do have a general interest in the space, but like sometimes you don't know you're interested until you're interested.
Yeah.
If that makes any sense.
Exactly. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. There's all kind of stories that will start off that it's kind of like, why are we talking about this? But hopefully pretty quickly you realize why we're talking about it. But, you know, I wanted to say something. I feel like that in the hunting space, like we're not just trying to preserve the ability to go out and shoot a deer or to shoot a bear. Like that's the very outer layer of something that we're trying to preserve. And I think that in a hunting community, and I'm not the first one to say this, but we're telling our story as humans. You know, I mean, like we have a big, deep cultural story. Like we are a product of something that is very, very American. I mean, truly very American. We're a subset of the culture that has been here since the beginning of this country and before. And I think a way to continue to fortify ourselves as a legitimate, permanent piece of American identity, the backwoodsman, the hunter, which has so many influences too. I mean, that's not just an American thing. I mean, I'm incredibly fascinated by the ways Native Americans have influenced influenced so many of the people that we look back to for identity, Boone and Crockett and, oh golly. I mean, what separated us from, I think what makes us different than Europeans is Native Americans. These people literally came, the European settlement anyway of the American colonies. These people were Europeans, and they came here, and they'd still be Europeans today if it weren't for the connection they had with the indigenous people that were here that were so influential. And it's such a turbulent and wild story. I mean, of atrocity. And that's what we hear a lot of, but there were a lot of places where we were deeply influenced by Native Americans. And I think that's what made the American backwoodsman who he was. And I like to give credit to the Native American influence that most of us don't even recognize inside of who we are. But point is, that was a tangent. Coming back to the main story here, Mark, the way that we can leave a lasting imprint on the culture is by telling a bigger story of who we are, and having insight into the human condition. So many of us talk about a connection to nature that makes us whole, makes us healthy. It's a place where we find spiritual connection, where we find God, I really believe that a genuine connection to hunting and the natural systems of the world has the potential, not in and of itself, to make us better people. It's not like going out and sitting in a tree stand is going to make you a better husband, but it does have, it's a conduit for that to happen. It's a conduit. And so I think that we have a place in the broader hunting community to be people that people look up to. There was a time when a hunter was the rock star of American culture, for real. I mean, we were the sports stars. I mean, like going back to that story of the Big Bear of Arkansas, this fictional, funny story about this character from Arkansas. I mean, basically jockeys and hunters, like men who raced horses, and the hunters were the LeBron James. They were the NASCAR, they were the Dale Earnhardts of that time, the hunters.
Right.
And it's never going to be quite like that. But when people meet a hunter, I think there should be a sense of, this guy's probably got some meat to the bone of his character and integrity and who he is. And obviously there's always bad apples. There's bad apples in every place. But in general, I think hunting should be synonymous with character,
Man,
and
that's beautiful. I mean, I think,
and so telling these stories like we do on, like I'm trying to do, is I want people that don't hunt to come listen to a story that they might be interested in, about Tecumseh or Boone, or we did a podcast once on gas station taxidermy, which might sound like something not somebody would be interested in, but we talked about quite a bit about American culture looking through the lens of deer heads hanging in rural gas stations. And I want them to be like, wow, I got some insight from that. And then they'll say, who told me that? Who are these people? And they're like, these are the hunters,
Yep.
And so that's what I'm trying to do, man.
Well, I mean, there really is so much, substance behind our history and hunting in general. And like you said, the character that it does build. I know, some of my greatest challenges in life and the things that I'm most proud of and the things that have shaped me as a person, they've happened in the woods, right? And I think the more we can hopefully, through stories like yours, encourage people who may not be as connected to the land to seek it out, maybe seek it out in a different way, a more meaningful way. It's just incredibly important for a multitude of reasons. You hear sometimes folks that start hunting later in life, right? And they kind of make that connection and connect those dots later in life. And they're like, man, like I didn't realize that was like innately inside of me. Like I feel so much more connected. There was a part of me that was missing that I've found now. And I think the more we can encourage people to do that, obviously the better. Not only even just for hunting as a whole to move forward and maintain those traditions, but for society in general, right? Like I just think there's so many valuable things there. And person doesn't have to spend, every waking moment, but I do think it can be a certainly an important part of their lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yep.
What Where should we go next, Clay? You've been taking me all over the map. I've enjoyed every second of it.
Well, talking about all this stuff about how much we love hunting and are passionate about it. I mean, a big part of my life too, Mark, is being balanced inside of my passions. I mean, I'm married. I've been married for 23 years. I have 4 children, and working for MeatEater or and doing what I do is not a license for me to just have a life that's imbalanced where all I do is hunt. I really don't. I mean, so much of my life revolves around my family and in our church and different places that I'm involved. And so as much as with everything I've said, I'm also working on a lot of parts of my life that don't have anything to do with hunting, but they're all connected to me. They really are. They're all connected.
For sure. Should we dive in, Clay? Should we dive in to one of your more recent bear stories?
Yeah, man. I'm ready.
So tell us and dive in. I used that very intentionally there. I'm sure you know that.
That was good, Mark. I caught that.
I know you caught that. So what's going on here? You were on a Southeast Alaska bear hunt.
Yeah.
And let's go through the entire hunt, but you definitely implemented some unique tactics.
Yes. So I drew a tag in Southeast Alaska, and just by chance, I didn't even know that Steve Ranella had put in his tag too, which I guess he does about every year, but he drew the same tag. And so I told him, I said, hey man, I got a tag. And he said, well, great. Well, then you can come with me. And I don't think it's a secret. I mean, it's been all over media and stuff. Steve owns what he calls the fish shack in Southeast Alaska. And so he was like, well, yeah, come bear hunt with me at the fish shack in 2023. And so we planned the hunt. And I had never I've done a lot of bear hunting in some of the country's best places to bear hunt, but I had never bear hunted Southeast Alaska. So this was new to me. And typically the way guys are hunting them is it's a coastal hunt where we were at anyway, where we're hunting them from boats. So basically you're in a small vessel back in little coves. And when the tide goes out, the bears come out onto the shore to eat blue mussels, crabs, to eat anything they can find that was left there by the tide. And that part of Alaska has some of the biggest tide swings in the world, I'm told. So you have these big, vast, pretty big areas of shore that are all of a sudden exposed for like 6-hour time periods based upon the tide and whatnot. And these bears come out in these tidal flats, and that's when you hunt them. When the tide is up, the tide goes right up to the edge of the woods, and it's thick, very thick woods. And so it's hard to see them in the woods. You got to catch them when they're out. And so anyway, Steve was telling me about this, and he knew that I have always enjoyed unique ways of hunting bears. And so he was like, man, I tell you what, he said, one thing I've always wanted to do was to wear my wetsuit that I have for spearfishing. And when you see a bear from the boat, just jump in the water and swim to the bear. Because the way it works is you have a, like, let's just say a 20-foot boat with a motor. Well, what we do is carry a canoe in the boat with us. And so you motor out to where you're going to hunt. And then if you're 300 to 400 yards offshore, these bears really don't care that you're there. So you're glassing bears from your boat and you see one, and then you put the canoe in the water, jump into the canoe, and then paddle not directly towards the bear, but to the downwind side of the bear, a couple hundred yards. And they had primarily hunted them with rifles. So really you're just trying to get within, 150 yards of the bear or whatever, or closer if you can, or further if you have to. But so you use the canoe to get onto the shore. It's illegal to shoot out of a boat. So you can't shoot out of a boat. Your feet got to be on the ground. And then you get on the shore and you stalk the bear. Well, I wanted to bow hunt, and Steve said, hey, I've always had this idea of using a wetsuit to swim up to a bear. And I said, well, why don't we do it? And he was like, well, we talked about all the logistics. I'd have to get a wetsuit. We'd have to figure out how to carry the bow. And basically it was a combination of Steve's knowledge of the area and his knowledge of spearfishing equipment. I would have never, Mark, that water of the Pacific Northwest. I mean, I'm from Arkansas, man. I'm inland. I mean, I'm a decent swimmer and have been in the water, but I'm not that cool with just like jumping in big, wild oceans. I mean, I was intimidated and wouldn't have even known that you could have really done that, to be honest with you. I mean, the water's very cold all year round, and killer whales and seals. And I mean, I had a lot of dumb questions at first for Steve.
I think it's smart for a person to ask those questions before you jump in the water. Like you said, that water is cold. It's not crystal clear. You definitely have, you look down, it's almost black, it seems. And
yes.
And I'd have a couple questions too.
And it's an ocean wilderness. That's what, you think of the ocean, you don't really think of it being a wilderness, but man, golly, when you're up there, it's a fly-in camp. So you can't drive to where we were at. You fly in on a beaver and land. And so you're literally in the wilderness. And then you go out from your camp and they're going way back in these remote coves. And that's an ocean wilderness. And so that was intimidating to me. But I also, Steve just said, I think we'll be able to get up close to a bear and it'll really work. And I knew it would work too. And, but it was still kind of we felt like there was going to be some real limiting factors on finding the right bear. And it was just going to be logistically difficult because it's not easy to put on a wetsuit. You don't just see a bear and just oh, let me put on the wetsuit. I mean, it's a commitment to put a wetsuit on. And so
I've put a wetsuit on a couple times and I was tired at the end of it.
Yeah. I've got a funny story about getting claustrophobic in that thing and nearly wigging out. But that's another day. So the first couple of days though that we hunted, my friend Randall Williams was with us as well. He works for MeatEater, and he killed a really nice bear with a rifle on day 3. And so he was up front. And so we were kind of watching bears and trying to figure out. I was not in a wetsuit. I was just support team for the first couple of days. Randall killed a bear. The whole time we're talking about it, like, man, I think I could have swam up to that bear, or there's no way I could have swam up to that one. Or we realized we needed a pretty specific alignment of things to happen for it to work. And the first day though that I hunted, I didn't even have the wetsuit on. I just had on waders, which waders are really great because you can stalk along the edge of the shore with your feet in the water and not make noise. I mean, it's like you don't have cover because you're out in the water, but the shorelines, we found them to be pretty loud, pretty difficult to stalk and get up close, doable for a bow, but I mean, people do it often. stalk bears in those conditions. But
Oh yeah, I've done that hunt a couple times, Clay.
okay.
But both times with the rifle. And when you're talking about noisy stalking conditions, I mean, you've got barnacles on rocks. You've got mussels on rocks. You've got broken clam shells that are breaking under your feet. You've got poppy kelp, which are like, I mean, a picture like the shoreline being lined with bubble wrap.
Yeah.
So
yeah, you know, man.
it's challenging. Like with the rifle, like less of an issue. Like you said, you get within a couple hundred yards or so, or you can shoot maybe across a little bay or something like that, or even from a rock or pinnacle or on the. But the bow, that's a little bit different story.
Right. Yeah, it's harder. And I stalked a couple of bears just using waders, trying to get it done, and had some great stalks. I hope they make the film, some of the stalks that we did with the bow, because we got in pretty close to some, but they just wouldn't turn right. And anyway, I didn't kill one. So that was the fourth day. The fifth day is when we said, okay, I'm putting on the wetsuit and we're going to try to kill one swimming up to it. And so what I did is I went here in Arkansas and bought a cheap little boogie board, like a 3-foot light styrofoam board with like this plastic shrink wrap around it. When I got it, Mark, it was like, it looked like, something a kid would have at a beach. It was like blue and yellow, and it was like kitty colors. And I spray painted it, and it had a little rope that you pulled it, and it was the perfect size for a bow. I mean, it was, about 36 inches long, I think, and about probably 20 inches wide, maybe 18 inches wide.
I'm sure it said that on the packaging too, like works great for bows.
Yeah. It's bow boogie board. Yeah. Yeah. And I got to give so much credit to Steve. This was Steve's idea. He said, go buy a boogie board. And I was like, great. And so, I can't tell this story with taking too much credit for it. This was Steve's brainchild. And so I want to give him the credit, but, I did that. And then I drilled 2 holes up through the boogie board with a big drill bit and put some hay string up through it, and was able to put the bow on the top of the boogie board and run this hay string up through and tie it on. So that was my technology. And then, Mark, I unclipped my Vortex rangefinder, and it's got the little squiggly tail, the stretchy squiggly tail,
bungee or whatever,
little bungee. And I just clipped that onto my bow in a secure way, so I knew that the rangefinder wasn't going to get lost in the ocean, and just set it up on the board. And this was untested. Like, we didn't test this before. I didn't know really how wet stuff was going to get. I imagined it would get quite wet, but still it was floating on top of the water. And what I learned real quick is that bow and that rangefinder were getting soaked with water constantly, just constant, getting splashed by waves. And I mean, the ocean's pretty rough. Even we were back in these coves, but still it's pretty rough water. And the first day we stalked a couple of bears, swam quite a bit, and never got within bow range of them. We had one bear smell us while we were in the water. And so I had a cameraman with me, Dirt Myth. Garrett Smith is his name. That we call him Dirt. And we felt like being in the water would do 2 things. A bear isn't going to have a natural predator in the water, and they're just less weary of things in the water. Number 2, we felt like it would be a silent approach, which was true, very true. Number 3, I felt like it would protect us from getting smelled, because all that was going to be above water was our heads. And I just thought, they're going to have a hard time smelling us. That proved to be not true. We had a bear wind us that we were trying to, the wind shifted when we got into about 50 yards of it. And that bear apparently smelled our breath because he absolutely spooked off scent while we were just barely sticking out of the water.
Golly, yeah.
Which is so interesting because, don't get me started on scent control. But it's like, buddy, you can wash your clothes, you can do a whole lot of stuff, but those critters can smell your breath.
Oh man. Well, you think about like some folks, like you said, don't get me started either. But like, I wear rubber boots, so for scent control, it's like, man, you were in a rubber suit for scent control with your
Yeah.
most of your body below the water. But
Yeah. No, it was fascinating to see that happen. So the first day we had limited success. Second day we stalked a couple of bears. I'm honestly losing track of how many days it took us. I want to say it was the third day I put on a wetsuit. That what had happened is we had seen bears. That part of Alaska is this intricate, just web of small little canals that go into bigger pools, and the shoreline is extremely cut up.
mm-hmm.
And there's islands all over the place. And there was one spot where we had seen bears 3 days in a row where 2 points came together and the bears were swimming across this like 40-yard section of a little canal. They were swimming across it to get to this other side. And we'd just seen bear after bear there. And there was an island about as big as a 4,000 square foot house with hardly any trees on it, about 50 yards from that point. And the wind was typically blowing out from the land onto on just where we were. It was blowing like out into the ocean. And so we decided that they were just going to drop us off on that island, me and Dirt, who had an underwater camera. I hadn't said that yet. He had an underwater camera, and we were just going to sit on that island and wait for a bear to pop up, and we were going to swim across the channel and go hunt it. And man, it worked incredibly well. Within a couple hours of sitting on the island, we saw a bear kind of, about 150 yards around this cove. He wasn't right in front of us, but he was coming our direction. Or well, we didn't know he was coming our direction. We just saw a bear 200 yards away, cross about a 40-yard channel. And it's a lone bear. At this point, I wasn't really worried about how big the bear was, or I wasn't trying to kill a monster. It would have been cool. I was more looking for a bear that was just doing the right thing.
Mm-hmm.
We see this bear, and we immediately just jump in the water and start swimming across this channel. And we get halfway to the land on the other side, and the bear had covered about 100 yards and pops up within bow range of me while me and Dirt are in the middle of the channel. I mean, just bobbing in the water. I got my boogie board, and the whole time, I hadn't mentioned it, multiple times while I was swimming, I'd look down and I would see that rangefinder bobbing down in the water, hanging off of that bungee, 20 inches under the salt water. And I had to have that rangefinder though. Like I didn't know if I was going to get a 10-yard shot, a 40-yard shot. I had to have that range. I couldn't find a way around it.
Right.
And it had to be accessible. It couldn't be in some weird spot. I didn't really have any storage. So that was the best way I could do it. And I was just like, man, we're going to test this rangefinder out. And so I say that to say, here I am in the moment of truth, and I need to know if this rangefinder works, if my whole system is going to work. So this bear pops up. I'm getting ahead of myself. The bear pops up. We're floating in the middle of this channel, and clear view of the bear, and he just never even acknowledges us. They're just not. He just thought we were a seal. Yeah. There were seals all over the place too. It was pretty it wasn't unnerving. It was just, you'd be swimming and we look like seals.
Right.
And there would be seals popping up, just like checking us out,
It's a big critter to be in the water with,
Yeah. And the bear pops out and he starts feeding on mussels within bow range, but we're in deep, deep water. And so we just kind of float down and get out of sight of the bear. There was a big rock on the shore about as big as a car. And we kind of crawled up on the shore and untied my bow, got my rangefinder, got my release on, got everything ready while I was kind of on the shore, protected downwind of the bear, probably 50, 60 yards from it at this point. Got back in the water, really only about waist deep, but we hunkered down where just our heads were up. And I mean, we just walked right to that bear. And I got about probably 12 yards from him. And I had to just get the angle just right. So I had to get that close. And I actually didn't end up using the rangefinder on that one because it was so close. I just was like, this bear's right in my lap.
Right.
But the rangefinder 100% worked and still works to this day. I tested it just before we got on here. I keep going back to it thinking, well, eventually that salt water is going to mess it up. It did not. It still works today. I mean, I just raised up out of the water and shot this bear, and it fell within sight, and it was an incredible experience. It was a challenge. It wasn't a stunt. It legitimately was like a way to kill a bear. If I was going back there, wanted to bow hunt, I'd do the same thing again. I mean, it would be it once I got this one under my belt, if I do go back, I will try to employ this to kill a big one. You know, I mean, like go in with the target goal of killing a really nice big male bear.
Yep.
And it was just a unique strategy that worked really well. So when I shot the bear, I was in water probably like up to my thighs, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But I was hunkered down and then just stood up. I just needed the bottom cam of the bow to clear the water, you know, when it shot. And when I shot, it's cool. The video's cool. It's just like a spray of water off of that bow.
No way.
And but it worked incredibly well. And so that's my boogie board bear story.
Man, I love it. Yeah, proof of concept for sure. And like you said, I mean, everything about it makes sense. Like you said, you're quiet. like, you know, if you've got like you said, you got to have the wind in your favor. But I think those bears, you know, why would they be expecting something coming from the ocean like that? And even if they do see something out there, I mean, there's driftwood and seals and birds, and there's a lot of stuff happening out there all the time. Like, even if they caught a little bit of movement, I just don't think it's necessarily going to register like what's going on there. I know even with like small inflatable boats or canoes, when I've been up there, like they'll tolerate, you know, a fair amount actually, as long as you're not being super ridiculous with it. But that's cool. And yeah, for anybody that's been around, and this is my shameless Vortex rangefinder plug, but anybody that's been around a marine environment, saltwater hates just about everything. And like I can't say that I'm going to go intentionally dunk my rangefinder in salt water, but that is an amazing testament to that unit that it worked. It would have worked in the moment, and it's still working today. And it sounds like the shot you got is the bow shot that we all look for, me included. I mean, I don't leave without my rangefinder, but when I get a shot that I don't need it, that's the shot that I'm looking for.
Yeah. Oh, and I was using it a lot on the other stalks and in different ways, but it worked great. And you know, I kind of just chalked it up to, if it failed, it was just like, you know, the cost of admission, you know. And I was spraying it off with a water hose every day. I'd take my bow. Yeah, and I mean, that's a testament to really how weatherproof these units are. I mean, golly, it puts, and now I'm not wanting people to go like test the limits with water in the field. I mean, that's not smart. I mean, it's a great idea to keep stuff dry, but again, this is just something I had to have. It had to be in the water. It was going to get wet. but I would come home every evening and take a water hose at the fish shack and spray off my rangefinder and my bow, trying to get that salt water off. And it didn't hurt it, man. It still works.
That is
still
awesome.
Works.
What was it like drawing your bow with a wetsuit on?
It wasn't that big a deal.
Okay.
It really wasn't. I had my head, my hood up over my head.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, when I was a kid growing up, my dad would have us shoot our bows with the head net and the gear we were going to be hunting with, you know, just trying to find that anchor point.
Mm-hmm.
And when I pulled it back, and I had pulled it back obviously with the wetsuit on before and had shot, and so I was confident in that. But if you know how it is, you shoot enough archery, even if it feels weird, you just know where your anchor is.
Mm-hmm.
Even though, because you know, that wetsuit slapped my ear up against my face, and you know, kind of felt awkward, but I just knew it's like, yep, that's my anchor. And it wasn't, and the constriction of the wetsuit is pretty, it's not too bad.
Okay.
I mean, I was able to pull a bow fine.
That is awesome, man. I mean, what an incredible, unique story. Like you said, it wasn't a stunt. It's just sometimes getting creative is what you need to do to have it work out, and that's definitely a fantastic example of it. And yeah, you talk about the water there being a wilderness, and then, you know, just the land is a wilderness there. It's definitely a unique and special place. One of my favorite places in the world is that region. And
yeah,
and it's cool that you got to experience it in that way.
Yeah, it was. It really was.
Wild
place.
Did we? I don't think so, Clay. Did we miss anything along our windy path to get to your bear story?
I don't think so, Mark. It was pretty, you know, the chronology there works for me if it works for you.
No, it works for us, man. I appreciate you taking the time, and appreciate everything you're doing. It's truly important work, and I think it's making a difference. And the information and the stories that you tell, and the manner in which you and the MeatEater team are doing, just really vital, impactful, and I can't thank you enough.
Yeah, thank you, Mark.
All right,
really appreciate it.
Take care. Well, hopefully we'll see you in the bear woods. You might like this, Clay, because I was going to wrap it. Now I'm not. I love bear hunting is one of my favorite things to do, and I'm actually going to leave and head up into the Alpine here in a couple weeks. And I actually planned this bear hunt more than a year ago, and I'm actually not archery elk hunting this year because I wasn't gonna be able. So I chose bears over elk this year.
Really? That's great.
I don't think too many people would do.
Well, good luck, man. You know, bears live in wild places, and I think that's part of the reason we hunt, is to just go experience a wild place. And sometimes what you're hunting is less important than the place, and bears live in cool places.
100%, man. Nope, you nailed it. I mean, that high alpine country, man, it's a special place. And I was just talking about that with the guy that I'm going with, and it's like, I've been in that country just one time before, but man, it captured my heart. And we didn't even get a bear. We saw 2 in a week of hunting, but I was like, I got to get back to that place, you know?
Yeah, man. That's cool.
So
that's really cool. Good luck.
Awesome. Well, thanks again, Clay. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Appreciate it. If you like this one, let us know. Drop a comment below. And until next time, happy hunting and shooting. We'll catch you on the next one.
There you have it, folks. Thank you very much for listening. As usual, give this video a like if you liked it, comment something below, and give us a subscribe to the Vortex Nation podcast channel. It would mean a lot to us. Also, why don't you give us a follow over on Instagram while you're at it, at Vortex Nation Podcast. We'd love to hear from you over there, and we'll keep you updated with all kinds of cool photos and videos from our adventures that we do here. Otherwise, we will see you on the next one. Thank you again. Happy hunting and shooting, everybody. Have a good one.